People who work in morgues or with the dead, what is the creepiest thing you've witnessed? Sometimes when people have died, and we turn them over to clean and dress them, they still have air in their lungs and will make grunting noises when moved. Scared the crap out of me the first time I experienced it. My grandpa had a related experience in Vietnam. He was helping wash and prepare bodies for transport home under the direction of the coroner, who had warned them about the bodies making noises when moved. After a bit, Grandpa asked the coroner how the body he was washing could cry. The coroner repeated the lecture about air being pushed out, and Grandpa said that he got that part, but how did that form tears? He said things got very busy after that. Grandpa's assigned corpse was not actually dead, just suffering a lot of blood loss and very cold. Dude got 5 liters of blood, some of it from my grandpa, and then he flew home to spend the rest of the war recovering. When my cousin died 28, I lived next door to him. So his GF came to my house screaming that he was dead. I was 25 at the time and went into his room, and yep, he was dead. I tried CPR just in case while his GF called 911. Now I have never done CPR before on someone. I have only done the regular certification training. So I do a couple rounds of breathing, then chest compressions, and suddenly he started groaning. I started crying, thinking that somehow I had brought him back. What I was never told in certification was that the air will come back out and make a groaning noise. Yeah, it fucked me up for a while, as he was my cousin and best friend. And just thinking that somehow I was able to get him back only to lose him again, man, that just got to me. Edit. I just wanted to thank everyone for the kindness that has been shown. To answer a few questions about what happened. He died from a heart attack. When the doctor met with the family at the hospital, we were told he had been dead for a while. Luckily he had died in his sleep, so there is at least that. He never messed with hard drugs but did drink heavily. I have had training several times and also knew the chance of survival were low. I guess that is why the groan he gave had me surprised, relived, or whatever you could call it. Over the years I have been trained by different people. None of them mentioned that you could force air out and cause a noise such as a groan. Of course, last time I recertified I was told to just do compressions. I will say, if available, please take CPR and first aid classes from an instructor. Do this especially if you have small children. My course covered infant choking and how to dislodge the foreign object that will come in handy. When my first son had something caught in his throat, luckily my wife was there and she was a XM, so she was able to get it cleared quick. My neighbor came over one night and told me that my dog had died in his backyard. I went to go get her, and when I picked her up, the air in her lungs came out in a moan. For one awful second there, I thought she was still alive and was going to rush her to the vet. Then I realized what the sound was. One of the decedent's grandsons faked a breakdown over the casket. He stole all her jewelry. Didn't take long to figure out, and a large brawl broke out. Jewelry was retrieved. 2 weeks later, grandson turns up needing to be processed and buried. Creepy as hell. Edit for eating shoots and leaves. Damn, if only he could have paid off that debt collector. Maybe if he had waited a couple days, they would have reused the jewelry on him. Worked at a funeral home for quite a while. When I first started, about a month in, I was working a holiday weekend. Only people working were the transport guys and me. They came to drop off a body and went right back out. I thought they were still there and needed to ask a question. I walked into the embalming area and this dude was sitting up on the gurney looking right at me when I opened the door, and it literally made me pee a little in fright. Turns out the transport guys picked up the body from an area hospital. He'd passed away while in a slightly reclining position and rigor had set in. They couldn't flatten him out. Still the scariest moment in my career, even if I got a laugh out of it later. I initiated compressions on my patient when she unexpectedly coded. About halfway through my first round, the patient pinked up, eyes opened, turned her head and groaned. I stopped, and so did she, turned gray and unresponsive, so I started compressions again. She woke up again, and I realized that compressions were providing adequate perfusion to her brain. So she'd wake up, but her heart wasn't doing anything. I had to continue compressions and shock my patient, who was awake, groaning, and alert enough to know what was happening. I've coded countless patients without a problem, but this event gave me nightmares for some time. I was part of search and rescue for 3 years. I was in the scuba team, so we were responsible for finding the usually dead people at sea. The salt water adds so much horror to a body. Not to mention the fish that usually will start picking on a corpse sooner than later. My creepiest experience was trying to find the body of a Jane Doe was missing. She was a prostitute against her will, brought over by human trafficking. Turns out she slit her wrist parallel to her veins and jumped into this rocky and sharp outcrop into the sea. We went diving in less than ideal conditions. It was low visibility and waves. My scuba buddy and I were looking at an outcrop when suddenly out of the darkest a deep blue hand emerged from this little cavern in the rocks. It began twitching and moving, and as we tried to pull the hand, the rest of the corpse emerged. She was being picked on by Murray eels, hence the twitching, which emerged with bits of human flesh in their mouths. Her mouth was wide open in a scream position and her eyes were gone. You can see tendons and bones in her hands, and the sharp rocks tore her entire body to shreds in various spots. Her toes were mostly gone too, with some bits of bone sticking out. To this day it haunts me. The worst was pulling her out and swimming with the body as eels and fish followed us, occasionally picking on bits of flesh. Obligatory edit to say thanks for awards, etc. I will try to respond to all the replies. Edit 2. Change the term sex worker to clarify that it was against her will as suggested by some Redditors. Human osteologist here. I work with dry human bones, so they don't do too much. But one of the times I've ever gotten the creeps was when I was handling a crania in the collection and could hear the wisdom teeth shaking around, partially formed but not quite erupted, in the mandible. Wisdom teeth form around 18 years old and erupt generally in late teens or early 20s. I, at the time, was about 20 and my wisdom teeth were just coming through. I realized these remains belonged to a girl about my age. That's probably exactly what my skull looks like. It really humanized things for me. Here is a funny story from my grandma. She used to work in Puerto Rico. Some guy had passed away, and so the doctor came up to her and asked her to prepare the body to go to the morgue. So, she got some sheets and started to wrap this guy up. As she crossed his legs, suddenly his penis became fully erect and was straight up. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but it forced her to have to redo the sheets. So as she uncrossed his legs, the penis went down. So she was like, all right, let's get this over with. Then she crossed them again, and lo and behold, the penis went straight back up. Tried one more time and then she got freaked out and went back to the doctor. Obviously he found this hilarious, as the guy apparently had a prosthetic in his penis. Worked at a mortuary for a few years. We have methods to keep the jaw shut for viewing, otherwise it would gap open due to the angle of the head and neck. During a viewing the device failed and this gentleman's mouth literally popped open. The lead embalmer was not on site, so I did my best. Ushered the family out of the room and superglued his mouth shut. But he didn't have teeth and supergluing just his lips did not work. It looked as if he was attempting to scream. I had to call in one of our other mortuaries in town, and that embalmer used a giant needle and thread to sew his mouth shut from under his chin to his palate. Not necessarily the creepiest thing, but the funeral home I worked for liked to embalm as soon as possible after death. I had embalmed a man that was dead for less than 30 minutes an hour. He was still warm and rigor had not set in yet. I kinda just held his hand for a minute before I got started. Edit. Wow, I'm really happy this comment blew up. It really shows that compassion isn't dead. Thank you. When my wife passed away suddenly, I was sitting with her in the and when I came back in, they had her swaddled like an infant. I managed to get her hand out and was holding her hand thinking Todd, as long as I was holding it, it wouldn't get cold. My wife is a mortician. She's had quite a lot of wacky experiences. This is more funny than creepy, but once she was trying to break up the rigor mortis in a decedent's hip by flexing the entire leg up. Her grip slipped and the leg swung down, the heel cracking her right in the face, resulting in a black eye. She had to explain to people that she's not in an abusive relationship, she just got kicked in the face by a dead guy. I'm not being abused, I got this from a dead guy. So, were you being abused? A friend told me this story ages ago, and I hope I remember it well enough. When he was 18, he worked for a single plane transport contractor, and one time they had to carry a body. It wasn't autopsied or prepared for a funeral yet, that was where they were taking it. So it was wrapped and just sort of laying on the floor. Now when you're in the air, I'm sure other pilots will tell you, the rise and fall of the airplane will do strange things with gravity, air pressure, and necromancy. In any case, The corpse had enough air in its lungs that the lower pressure outside the body caused the air inside to be expelled, slowly, and through the larynx. Meanwhile, rise and fall of the plane caused the body to sit up and the wrapping to fall a while. Sitting up caused it to expel more air from the lungs. So while flying a dead body in the plane, they heard a long low moan, and saw a dead body sit up in the back of the plane. The pilot panicked, left the controls, and ran back and punched the corpse across the face, knocking it back down. He told me about how they figured out what happened, but I was laughing too hard at that point to really pick up the details. I do remember that they had to explain the additional damage to the corpse when they arrived at their destination. Edit. A detail and a spelling. Had a gig doing overnight transport of dead bodies. Think black suit, white shirt, black tie, unmarked black van, and boss made us wear white gloves. He wanted us to look high dash and ... Needed to transport a recently deceased middle-aged woman breast cancer 250 miles in the dead of night from a hospital morgue to a mortuary near her extended family. It's been a solid 2 hours of total silence when the corpse lets out a low wail. Sounds like UHH. I about shit myself as I swerve off the freeway and spray out a rooster tail of gravel and dirt. Even though, intellectually, I know this is just stomach gases escaping the body, I couldn't help but be a little freaked out. Attended a suspected fire once where we could smell smoke but couldn't locate the fire. Eventually located it, and when we entered the house there was an old woman slumped over on the floor. Tried to turn her over but couldn't. Turned out that she had been laid on one of the old bar-type heaters, and because the heat was not allowed to escape, it had burned a hole through the floorboards and the heater fell through the hole. However, when she was laid on it, her body fat started to melt and run into the floorboards. Then, when the heater fell through, she cooled. By the time we got there, she was one with the floor. 2 of us to get shovels under her to roll her over. It was years before I could eat smoky bacon flavor crisps again. This is gruesome. If someone's been down for more than a day or 2, they'll start decomposing from the inside out. If the room is quiet enough, you can hear lots of gurgling and rumbling as the gases and fluids are moving around inside. And then you move them and they groan as the residual air in their lungs is forced out past their vocal cords. True blave. Before COVID, I worked at a funeral home that wasn't particularly well run. I was a funeral assistant, and one of the embalmers was notoriously difficult to deal with. Her name was AJ. About 4 days before this story, AJ had picked up a deceased man who had died of septicemia and who was to be cremated due to the fact he was already in a bad state on death. So AJ had the brilliant idea to leave this gentleman on the rolling cot for 4 days unrefrigerated, figuring it wouldn't matter since he was being cremated and it was a slow week. Of course, I got the job of moving him to the crematory with AJ. We walked into the embalming room and found that the decedent had bloated and was leaking a gray liquid sludge out of his urinary catheter onto the floor. If pestilence had a smell, it would have been this liquid. It smelled like a warning to the base lizard part of my brain. To describe this liquid as smelling bad is an understatement. The liquid was something you could feel and sense in the air. AJ and I donned our gear, and luckily, since she placed him on a cot already, we didn't have to do much in the ways of moving the body. Unluckily, the cot was relatively old and one of the cot wheels had to be manually unlocked using hands, as the foot pedal was too rusted to effectively use. AJ told me to unlock it, and so I carefully bent down and unlocked the wheel. Well, AJ got the bright idea to shake the cot violently as some sort of prank, sending the gray liquid over the edge directly onto the top of my head, dripping down under my eye protection and mask. I closed my lips and eyes so the liquid running over them would stay out of my body, and calmly walked to the employee bathroom in a sort of numb state of shock. The funeral home owners saw my sludgy appearance and sent me home paid for the rest of the day.